Welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. Our guest for this episode is Will Baggett, who is an award-winning major sports professional, former strength coach, and dynamic speaker. He has helped produce events such as the Super Bowl, the Final Four, and a host of college football games. Over his 6-year coaching career, Will has helped produce 19 draft picks, including 2 first-round picks, and his first book, The Blueprint for a Successful Career, was released to widespread acclaim and has been added to the curriculum at 6 national universities. In this part of my conversation with Will, we go over the first phase of building a successful career, which is laying the groundwork. In this phase, Will stresses the importance of buying into the company culture for personal and professional growth. He highlights the critical onboarding phase where new hires transition from proving themselves to embracing continuous improvement and warns against the dangers of ego and entitlement. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. And that's what I love about your book and your approach, because your approach is your first professional opportunity. You need to lay the groundwork for the remainder of your career. And I love your background story in the first part of that book, where you said, you quickly learned this lesson through your father, who was a construction manager and always took you to his work sites on summer breaks. So walk me through that story and what he taught you about laying a strong foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing, my dad always said. So I'm a seventh generation entrepreneur, going back to my grandfather who was also in construction and was a landlord, all those things. But my dad always said that, now Will, we're gonna go do a foundation today for this house he's gonna build. And he says, listen, if we don't get the foundation right, the whole house is gonna be off. Right. This is the key player in the game. And he didn't know what he was teaching me at that point in time, because my dad didn't really wasn't into sports and didn't grow up playing sports or anything like that, but he was giving me so many life lessons that I applied to sport and life as a whole, thereafter. And if you think about it, right, if you've ever if known someone that has gotten in a house with the foundation off and the house settles and it shifts, I mean, you might as well knock the house down, you know what I mean, at that point, because your house is not level. And so I took that, to heart in terms of, okay, if you're going to build a successful career, you have to make sure that you're studying under the right people, right? Make sure you're building the right habits and doing things the right way, actually treating people the right way, operating with excellence at all times. And that's what I think was the most important thing. And so when I got into college, I was coming in as a grad assistant, and I didn't get into the college I wanted to get into at first. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And so I went from just, going into getting denied to getting into a great program. And I ended up becoming a strength and conditioning coach, in addition to a graduate assistant, in addition to selling concessions, in addition to selling nachos and game programs, because I didn't have a background in sports. I needed to build my career the right way. And I'm just thankful I had opportunities from people that gave me a chance to show who I was and what I could bring. And if not for that experience and people believing in me and giving me an opportunity to lead small teams and do the small jobs, I'm a big proponent of how you do anything is how you do everything. Right. And so whether I was watering the plants behind the building or filling up the vending machine, they saw that and they say, okay, if he takes this seriously, surely he'll take this next thing seriously. And that's kind of how it grew from there. And I'm just thankful for every experience. But strength coaching was definitely something that taught me a lot about leadership and operating with excellence and integrity. And I'll say there's one thing, that really helped me out a lot. When I was at the AFCA, American Football Coaches Association, our leader was it was that time, late 70s, early 80s. And at the time, I was assigned to do signage, move boxes, and just kind of operate from the neck down. And he fell ill the day before, and they assigned me to be his assistant to take him all around the Gaylord and Nashville. And if you've ever been there, it's a city within a city. And if you have an 80-year-old CEO, we don't have time to be making wrong turns. And so I took that to heart, and I mapped out the entire hotel on my own, walked every route, every corner, every trap door, and I had a little cart for him and everything. And we never made a wrong turn for the next 4 days, and that became my job for the next 5 years. And so if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. And I would say that my career is largely an outgrowth of that, of staying ready so you don't have to get ready, because you never know an opportunity to be presented.
Well, it's something also that you mentioned too, that when you're starting your career, no job is too small. How you do anything is how you do everything. be where you are. And we'll get into that a little bit more later, but just taking pride in knowing that you're going to have to put in your time. You're going to have to be, I heard this from one of the famous authors, Ryan Holiday, is that, you are the least important person in the room until you prove otherwise with results, right? So do the grunt work, do the things people don't want to do so that you can differentiate yourself and your brand. I remember a story by Bill Belichick where when he was starting to get into coaching, and he was with Parcells staff of the New York Giants, and he decided that he was going to be the best at game film. No one wanted to spend days in the room just looking at game film. But he took that to heart. He said, I'm going to be the best at this that I can be. And that later in his career, that's really part of what differentiated him and his brand, is being so attuned to picking apart defenses, to knowing weaknesses based on looking at the film, because he had done it for so long and gotten to such a level of proficiency with it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, he got his. It reminds me of Bill Gates, and he was messing around with computers as a teenager, so he got his 10,000 hours very, very early, and sounds like he did with Belichick as well. And I got a similar experience when I became a strength coach. No one wanted to wash the bottles, so we would give our athletes these bottles, fill them up with like protein and all kind of gunk and all kind of stuff and whatever we needed to feed them or liquidate them with to make sure they had the right kind of nutrients. And they would have a bunch of gunk at the bottom of them once they got done drinking them and workouts were over. And I'd have about 125 of them. And I'd get my buckets of water and soap and I would just scrub. I would just scrub for the next, hour or so. And no one wanted to do that. Right. And but that gave me some separation and it helped me earn a shirt that I was trying to earn that year. And so everyone was walking around in like Nike combat gear, very fresh, very clean, all the full-time coaches. I'm walking around in starter that I got from Walmart. And I had to wash it every other night to just have a fresh uniform, right? Because I didn't have any money or resources. And when I asked for a shirt one time, I didn't realize I was kind of out of turn. And the coach, he kind of snapped at me. And in that environment, it's tough love. You just got to deal with it. And he was like, I was like, Coach, I would love to wear one of those shirts. And he was like, well, what have you done to earn a shirt? I said, well, I done my job. He said, that's the problem. Just doing your job. I mean, you got to go above and beyond. You got to go the second mile. And that's when I found finding ways to do more than what I was expected to do. And that's how I ultimately earned my shirt, my Nike Combat shirt that all the full timers had. And I don't know if I've had a greater experience in terms of having to earn something that was harder and more difficult than earning that shirt. And I just, and it changed my way I saw things because he saw enough in me to understand like, hey, some people in a way realize that you can operate at 80% and be better than 90% of the population. But for you, that's still 80%. And he got 100 out of me, regardless of external circumstances and the stimuli. And that's what I appreciate the most from him. He taught me a lot.
Great story. Well, let's move into part one of your when you're starting your career, you got to get the lay of the land. And the first part is really creating buy-in, which is working for you more than just a paycheck, right? I mean, you need to help new hires embrace the company culture by showing them why their position is important, helping your team successfully to fulfill its purpose. And many people feel like when they first start at a company, it's really the onboarding process. They're going to go through that orientation phase with human resources. That's going to provide that rundown, and that creates the buy-in, which you disagree with, correct?
I disagree with that wholeheartedly. Honestly, there's, and I get it. I believe one of the best abilities are availability. But if you go down the line, there's a few different abilities I'd put above this. But another great ability is scalability. And in order for a business operation to optimize their functions and continue to grow and achieve growth, they got to be able to scale, right? So they can't create an individual profile every single person. Some companies do that. Some smaller ones and startups, they're more progressive. But more of the older companies that are more traditional, they're just going to give you the run of the mill. Here's the manual. Here's this. Sign this. Watch these videos, and come work for us. And oftentimes you're kind of being thrust into something that may or may not fit what you are great at or what your skill set is or what your aptitude is, because just kind of a very cookie cutter type position and cookie cutter leadership. And even if we think about the way we led pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic, that had to change, right? Because like it or not, Gen Z is here and they're demanding things. And I like to err on the side of not necessarily right and wrong, but different. And it's different, right? And so I think, when it comes to leaders and people in that space, I understand you're working with a large volume of people and things of that sort. But you have to understand that you got to look at the person before the position, right? Understanding who they are. And maybe maybe the HR leader, maybe just get them on the bus. but the leadership, once they're in the organization, has to get them in the right seats, right? And I think that's one of the best things you can do as a leader, not only get them on the bus, but get them in the right seats and optimize their skill set, right? Because so many people are yeah, they're underperforming because they're underutilized, right? And they're bored, right? And so I'm appreciative that I've had great leadership that have put me in positions to challenge me and stretch me, that have kind of built those new neural pathways and have given me that confidence the way I can do this, right? And that was a huge difference maker for me. So I would say, like I said, there's got to be ways to where we optimize what we get from our people, because people are having real problems. They're dealing with real issues. They're living with real situations. And if they don't feel cared about, then their tenure at their organization is going to be very, very short.
I think a lot of organizations don't do a great job doing that onboarding process to really share the mission and the purpose with their employees. And employees, when they first start working, right, they're in that kind of that new position. And their first objective tends to be, I want to make sure people believe that I deserve this position, right? So they are in that proving stage. But eventually they move beyond that, some of them, but some of them stay in it. So talk to me a little bit more about why we should probably stay in that proving phase a little bit longer and not become so complacent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it has to be, it has to be a personal standard, right? Because no one should be able to set a standard for you that's higher than your personal standard of performance, of integrity, of morality, value system. Like, these things you have to do when no one's looking. You got to go sit by yourself and understand, okay, what are my non-negotiables? What are my values? What do I care about the most? What do I want to be known for? What kind of legacy do I want to leave? That has to be decided for yourself. So no matter whether you have poor leadership or great leadership, you're still operating in a transcendent manner. And I identify as Christian, and one of my favorite scriptures talks about, do the work as unto the Lord and not unto men. And so I subscribe or ascribe to those type of approaches. And I understand there's different belief systems that I'm respectful of, but it has to be a personal standard that you adhere to no matter what the situation and environment is. And so you're proving things constantly to yourself, right? And getting that approval from yourself and comparing yourself to your version of you who you were yesterday, and not necessarily comparing yourself to other people. Now, what leaders will do sometimes, and I'm not opposed to it, they'll create a thing called co-opetition, right? Where they'll try to get some of their subordinates or people that work under them to kind of compete in a way, to kind of bring each other up in a way. But for me, the way that I was trained, the way I was taught as a strength coach, is that we operate at the highest level, no matter what, no matter who's around, and no matter who's looking. And I noticed when I got into the workforce that mentality wasn't shared and it wasn't common. And so, if I'm being honest, just by doing the basic things at a really high level, I was able to ascend and get more opportunities by doing the really basic things at a really, really high level. And it would shock you how many people skip over the small steps, skip over the basics, leave that thing just undone. They could have went just one step further, could have proofread it one more time, and they decided not to. And that's one of the things I think that really shaped my career, in terms of having that approach to excellence and doing things with a can-do attitude and a positive attitude. It wasn't really hard for me to ascend, with that in mind. But I attribute that to my mentors and sponsors that put me in that position, and that saw enough in me. And I think when you are in that proving phase, you put yourself in position to get the jersey or earn the jersey of the other person, so to speak. And I may be jumping ahead, so pardon me, but you want to put yourself in position to where these people feel comfortable recommending you, feel comfortable, hey, if they can't make it to a certain event, sitting you in their place. But you have to create that environment of comfort and that psychological safety. And one of my favorite quotes, I'm a big quote guy, it says that you build trust by keeping your promises to other people, but you build confidence by keeping your promises to yourself. And so that's what I was trying to think about. So when I'm operating, and that's what I would encourage people to do, is prove things to yourself. Operate with excellence despite what it is, because the big time has to be where you are right now. And you have to make every opportunity at hand the absolute best it can possibly be, because you never know who's watching, you never know who's looking, you never know what coworker you have that may be in an exposition, maybe ready to leave out and wants to bring people with him or her. And you have to be in position. Like, I just big on being in position.
And getting back to that proving phase, it's not a finite period of time. You should look at it as a way of life, because I love the quote that you have, and I've heard it before, is that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And if you are the type of person where if you get assigned anything, right? You need to have the mindset and the work ethic to say, take all of these small assignments seriously. And imagine, and then people will think, okay, well, if he did that great or she did that great, with this small assignment, I can't imagine what they're going to do with a much larger assignment. It's going to build confidence in your abilities, and they're going to hopefully then promote you to a better position. But the Dr. Martin Luther King quote that you put in the book, I think, is really apropos here. And people, when they start their career, there's two things that usually get in their way, and they both start with the letter E. That's ego and entitlement. So talk to me a little bit about those and what you've seen maybe from your career and the people that have kind of succumbed to those.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that, there's a really popular book called Ego is the Enemy that I highly recommend people check out. And I also want to kind of clear the air that ego in and of itself is not a negative word in and of itself. It's part of your self-concept, right? But it's someone that can have an inflated ego, right? Or someone that can be, very humble. There, you kind of get into the different connotations now of so-called positive and or negative, right? And again, I try to ascribe to the mindset of not always positive and negative, but different, right? Different ways of doing things. And, you need your people that are doing marketing and doing outbound sales to be extroverts and more often than not, right? There are introverts that have value in that space as well. But again, it's people have different ways of going about things. So to kind of level set, ego in and of itself is not bad. It's a part of your self concept. You have to know who you are, know what you care about, and you have to be confident in yourself, right? But when you get to that point where you think you are deserving of something you haven't put the work in for, they were getting into an inflated ego and they were kind of graduating to the level of entitlement. I heard a speaker say one time, he's a former basketball trainer, and a guy asked him, he says, "Man, I want to do what you do. I want to be where you are." And he said, "Well, you got to do what I did 15 years ago." And nobody wants to hear that. You know what I mean? And even as we have this podcast and I've been speaking for 7 years now and done almost 300 engagements. And people ask me all the time, "How'd you do it?" Well, I point to this thing behind me. There's 150 books behind me that I read that when no one was looking and it was just me and I was driving Uber. And when I was driving Uber, I would practice my speeches on my passengers, right? To kind of get their feedback and see about, okay, is this resonating? And so I think the biggest thing is when you get into the ego and entitlement, it gets real dangerous. It gets real hairy because people see that and they sense that. I think now as we're moving into this space where the advent of artificial intelligence, people have a keen sense of awareness on things that are not real, right? And I think as we get more into AI and these things continue to change and metastasize, people are going to be yearning for authenticity and people being true to themselves and people being just good people. And it's just that sense you get when you're around somebody that's good, that wants to do things the right way, and that's a kindred spirit. You just feel a certain way. And so I think the ego entitlement is the way I look at it is this: if you want more, you got to do more. I've never said that you just because you're a certain age you can't go and achieve great things, right? The guy I used to work with at Front Office Sports, he started the company when he was 23 years old as a grad student at the University of Miami. The company's now worth over $60 million, but he wanted more and he did more to get right? And so that's how I think the thing is. And so I think it's a matter of framing it. Okay, if you want it bad enough, if you want to skip the line, you got to do what it takes to skip the line, right? Because there's people every day we see that have been successful 20 something years old, 30 something years old. Truett Cathy created Chick-fil-A at age 55, right? And so I think people are getting in a rush because of what they see on social media and they're watching highlight reels of what people are doing and where they're going. And, I'm a big proponent of running your own race, right? Because if you compare your chapter one to someone else's chapter 20 or chapter 30, then you're always going to feel inadequate. And another quote, surprise, surprise, Albert Einstein once said that everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, he'll spend the rest of his life thinking it's stupid, right? And I think that's where we kind of fall, with where we are now. And even in the past, even my generation, is we want it right now because we have so much exposure to everything. We know what everyone's making, we know what everyone's doing, we know what everyone is, we know who everyone's talking, you know what I mean? And I don't think that's always healthy. So I think it's very important to learn to unplug and just get to know yourself better, learn what you want. Because for some people, they may think that, okay, success is house, car, whatever this looks like. But I know people that, my grandmother never made more than 30 grand a year, but she was rich in relationships, right? She had a good, fulfilling life because she had people that cared about her and she cared about and she helped people. And I think so many people are getting conditioned to what they should want and not thinking about what they actually want. And they feel like they're entitled to these things, but they don't have the passion to go put the work in to do it. And the last thing I'll say to that is those people that are not doing the work should not get in the way of the people that are doing the work, right? It takes time, it takes effort. And anything, you look at life, the only place where success comes, in the first dictionary, right? And the only time you can be successful in the very beginning is when you're digging a hole. That's really the only time you can be successful at the very beginning and genesis of something. And for me, I love the journey. Like I love it when it's ugly. Like I love the process of building something from scratch, going from ideation to fruition. That's my favorite part, right? Once it's built, I get a little bored. So I love building things, all right, to be honest with you. So I love the process.
And you got offered a common piece of advice early in your career, which really didn't set well with you. And that is, be where you are. But over time, you thought, okay, that's not a bad piece of advice. And you actually learned a lot from that, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just making the big time where you are and understanding that where you are is for a reason, right? And the things what I'm able to talk about now, the experience I have now, no one wants to hear, and when as a speaker in my lane personally, our whole game and our whole approach is about storytelling. And what does storytelling involve? An introduction, a rising action, a climax, falling action, resolution, what have you. Think about kind of common plot. And if everything was just great the entire time and everything was perfect the entire time, then you're not really relatable to the common person. And I'm not saying you should want bad things to happen. Like I'm glad for you if your life was perfect, but that's not the experience of the everyday person. And so I think that these challenges, these lowly jobs, working in the mail room, Roger Goodell did it, right? These things build the most character and they give you a sense of relatability and they humanize you, right, for connecting. Because as we know, the most important things relationships in any environment, in any career, it's all about relationships. But if you don't have a sense of relatability and you're so inflated and so entitled to what you think you should be doing or this is below me, I mean, the quote says, if serving is beneath you, then leadership is beyond you. And I wholeheartedly believe in that. And so when I first heard that quote, I'm like, what do you mean be where I am? Because I mean, is that not counterintuitive? I'm trying to get to the next level. But it's like if I start skipping steps and if I start overlooking things and I start overlooking the person that's in front of me, I've seen people who have overlooked graduate assistants and interns that have gone on to become their bosses, right? You just never know someone's trajectory, where they're going to be. And one thing I've learned, I heard from a guy named Andy Dolich, he talked about a thing called LOL or loss of logo, right? What happens when you lose that logo or you lose that job or you're not in that position anymore, or you can't provide those tickets or those resources, the happy hours. What happens to your relationships? You learn to strengthen your relationships when things don't go your way. And so I think being where your feet are enables you to, bloom where you're planted, really just take an inventory of the landscape that's around you and what opportunities are available to you and how you can innovate. Like one of my biggest things, everywhere I've been, I've changed something. I've innovated something that they continue to use and implement to this day. But if you are not able to get on the ground level, then I don't think you'll ever be a great leader because you won't understand the experience of your lowest tier workers. You won't understand what they're doing. You won't be able to connect with them. You just went to the right to the top spot and you don't know what the guy in the mailroom is dealing with. But if I put it like this, people become very important when they become very important in the sense of this. We may walk into an office building every day, used to being clean and nice and secure. But what happens when the security guy doesn't show up? All of a sudden, he becomes really, really important. What happens when the janitor and custodian team, they come in last night and clean up? Now, all of a sudden, they become really, really important. And so I think it's a matter of just go ahead and treating people and treating opportunities with the respect they deserve when you're in it and not when it's escaped you. And now you're all of a sudden realizing, oh, wait, that was pretty valuable. What they did is pretty significant. If we don't get our mail from the guy in the mail room, I mean, how are we gonna know what's going on? How are we gonna pay the bills? Or how are we gonna, it could be $100,000 check in the mail, right? So all of a sudden it becomes very, very important. So let's treat opportunities and positions and places with the respect they deserve while we're in them.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.